area. I'm a nurse practitioner in the area, and I've been here since 2002, came for college and just never left. It's home now. I have the most amazing 5-year-old son. I've been married now for 12 years to my husband, who's also very active in our Johnson City community and local area. But thanks for having me here.
The next person we're going to hear from is Karlyssa.
Karlyssa. Okay, now I'm here. Now I'm not. Okay. Hi, my name is Karlyssa Williams. I am an Elizabethan native, born and raised, graduated from Elizabethan High School, and went on to graduate from King and from Milligan, and then I got married, and my husband's in the Army, and so we moved to El Paso, and now we live in Columbia, South Carolina. So I'm here, but I'm not here. You know what I mean? So anyway, okay. So yeah, I've been married for 5 years. I have 2 sweet little fat babies. Well, one is fat and one is not, but they're really cute and chunky. And yeah, that's it. Just, yeah, okay. So that's all.
Next person we're going to introduce is Gracie.
So my name is Gracie Carter, and I'm actually from Washington County, but I am always in Carter County doing stuff. I'm very active in the Carter County area doing drug prevention, recovery, things like that. I'm in school to be a forensic psychologist, and my specialty is a little weird, so I do that. I'm also mixed, and so I try to go to different places and different things and speak out about racism, especially within this area. Growing up mixed with a Black dad and a white mom made it really confusing and hard to navigate, so I try and speak up and help others with that.
The next person we would like to introduce is Mr. Terrence.
You're muted, Terrence.
Can you hear me now? All right, start over again, I'm sorry. It's like, how's everybody doing tonight? It's like, my name is Terrence Turner Jr. I was born in Birmingham, Alabama, but raised here in Carter County. Only thing I know is this area. I love this area, and I'm married to Emily Turner, and we have a beautiful 5-year-old son, and I coach at Witten Huddle, and I help coach just around the surrounding area.
Wonderful. And the next person we're going to hear from is Destiney.
Hey guys, so I'm Destiney. I was born and raised here. I go to college at MTSU. I'm an education major. That's really about it. I'm not married. I don't have any kids, so can't one up anybody on that one.
Thank you, Destiney. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So can you share a time that you felt like you were treated differently because of the color of your skin? And I think we're going to start with Mr. Terrence.
I'll say right now that there's some stories that are more hard than others, but most of my experiences were like indirectly, and people would they wouldn't be able to say it to your face, but they talk behind your back and you'd hear it from other people, of course. And really, it was really, you know, I was more prominent in sports, so it happened more in sports than anything. You know, I would be, you know, when I got tackled or something like that, I'd be called the N-word or say, you know, they'd say some racial slurs about, you know, my skin. But I mean, other than that, like, you know, yeah, some other people have different stories, of course. It's like, but most of mine were indirectly, especially when I started dating my wife. Uh, you know, we saw a lot of that. A lot of people come out about that and not see it the way that we do.
All right, now Karlyssa, if you could please share.
If I've ever had a time where I feel like I've been treated differently because of my skin color, because of my race. Yeah. Okay. I don't know. I fall into the category of being what most people call racially ambiguous or ethnically ambiguous. And so people know that I'm brown, but they don't know if I'm Hispanic, if I'm a Latina, if I'm biracial. They have no clue. And so I'm sure that there are times that I have that I don't even realize it. But the time that I think about the most is I was in Texas with my husband and my sister. And we were driving to Big Bend National Park. Fun fact, it's like deep down in Texas, and it's one of 10 like, deep sky parks in the US. So you can go there and see the Milky Way in all of its glory. It's beautiful. But anyway, while driving there, I got pulled over for going 4 miles over the speed limit, which is pretty preposterous, I think. But whatever, 4 miles over the speed limit, there I am. And when the officer approaches me, he immediately asks me to get out of the car. He doesn't ask me for my driver's license or for my registration, just asks me to get out of the car. And so I did what I was told, you know. And the rest of the stop was fine. I mean, I gave him my name and I ended up giving him all of my documents. But I don't think that if I looked different, I think if I had white skin, blonde hair, blue eyes, or whatever, that I wouldn't have been asked to immediately step out of the car with my brown husband in the seat and my sister in the back. I don't think that would have happened. And that was right around when Sandra Bland had just gotten killed, and so racial tensions were really high. So yeah, that's my story of whenever that's when I've been most fearful, I guess, when I feel like I've been treated differently because of the color of my skin. So yeah, there's that.
So much for sharing. All right, Miss Gracie, would you like to share?
Yeah, so I would say the first time I really realized like, oh, there's a difference, there's something going on is, you know, when you're darker than everybody else and people are like, you're tan all year long. Or my personal favorite, it's when they see your hair and they're like, oh, I've always wished I had black girl hair. And then you just kind of do this face thing and this eye roll where you're like, what? And then the bigger experiences were when I was in high school, things that other people would do that were just like straight lined, everybody else can do them. I would be kind of pulled out for it. So I could be talking and somebody would be like, stop talking, Gracie, but there would be 5 other people talking. I played soccer in high school and we would be called the N-word a lot. There was 3 girls that were African American on my team, and it was a common thing. So I would say those were my experiences.
Thank you. Destiney, would you like to share?
Yeah, so my most memorable experience, I guess you would say, is probably the first time it happened. So through kindergarten through my senior year, my best friend was a white girl with blonde hair, blue eyes, just whatever. Well, when we went to elementary school together, and in middle school, the elementary schools like integrate. So in sixth grade, like the third day of school, this girl comes up to my friend and she was like, "Why are you friends with a black girl? Are you going to sit with her at lunch?" And I was like, "Wait a minute, what?" Because like I had never thought about it. Nobody ever said anything. I mean, we were kids. So nobody ever said anything. And then like when that happened, I was like, oh, so people do look at me different. Because I mean, that was the first time anybody had said anything. So yeah, it's probably my first experience, most memorable.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for sharing. I know these stories are really hard to hear. I know it can be really hard. So if you find yourself needing any support or needing someone to talk to, please feel free to via chat box. And Miss Courtney, we would love to hear from you as well.
Sure. I think that mine started in elementary school. I guess when you're involved in public school system, you kind of get thrown into meeting different people and being around different people from different backgrounds. And I did go to private school briefly up until mid-elementary, but I think that that's when it started for me as far as kind of recognizing like, oh, well, everyone's not nice. Everyone's not going to love me the way that my family loves me or the way that other friends loved me. And I grew up in Morristown. I'm like an hour down the road, a rock's throw from this area, another kind of tight-knit but not very diverse community, especially in the early 80s when I was there and being raised there with my family. So just kids at school, I think the one that stands out the most, and it was generally from one person, we all have our person who we'll never forget in life, who kind of introduces us to the fact that we have skin that's different. And so that person would constantly kind of nag at me and brush my skin, and in particularly one day said, "Oh God, she touched me. Is my skin gonna turn the color of hers?" And that was the one that I remember specifically. I remember what grade. I remember going home and just being like a wreck, and my parents really having a heart-to-heart conversation with me. And that was in first grade. So it starts early. It starts earlier than that for some people. But yeah, elementary school is when it started, and kind of continued on a continuum throughout all of my education.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. I can't imagine. So the next question is, can some of you guys share any time that you felt like you were worried for your kids in their future?
I'll go. I have two young boys. I have a 2-year-old and a 5-month-old. The neighborhood that we live in now is predominantly Black. So I don't feel as fearful as if I think I might if our neighborhood wasn't, if I felt more nervous. I don't know. Anyway, he rides his bike all the time. He is obsessed with riding his bike. And whenever he rides his bike, he sometimes, lollygags, and he'll go off and sit in someone's driveway or just roam and, pick up flowers out of people's yards. I mean, he's 2, kind of does what he wants. But whenever we've been walking, I mean, we make sure that whose ever yards he's in, that we know who they are, which I guess is maybe just like a courtesy type thing to do. But we make sure, don't touch anyone's cars, don't touch their stuff, get over here, get away, because you don't know who's going to see him when he's, 10 years from now, if he's doing the same thing, and they pull out a gun. I mean, there have been stories about kids who have missed the bus to go to school, and they've gone and knocked on a neighbor's door and they've been met with a gun. You know, like that's insane. So I think any mother who has Black children, specifically Black boys, I think they're all fearful. I don't think I'm as fearful right now because my kids are still little and they're so cute. They're so, oh my gosh, they're adorable. And they are, and I love them so much. But what happens when they go from being cute to a threat? At what point are you going to start, you know, moving over to the other side of the road when you see my cute little boy? At what point are you going to clutch your purse a little bit tighter when you see my cute little boy? So my fears are more embedded in the future and what the future holds, more so than right now. But yeah, so that's my bit.
And I'll piggyback onto you, Karlyssa. I think that everything she said stands true and holds true in my life. And I feel like that is my highest anxiety point right now is my son. I feel like I can probably hold my own for myself. My husband's good. We can protect ourselves as best we know how and in the best way possible. But for my son, when he is not inside of my eyeballs for me to be able to physically see him, I am quite literally tortured with fear. He goes across the street now, and we live in a predominantly Caucasian neighborhood, which is great. We have amazing neighbors, we really do. But for those people who don't necessarily know where this little kid with crazy curly hair came from are going to look at him some type of way and wonder, well, where'd this kid come from and how's he over here? And so that anxiety for me is like very, very real. I will not allow him to go further down the road. If I can't look outside and physically put my eyeballs on him, then it's not going to happen. And as far as his future goes, you know, I grieve for him. I grieve the fact that I probably will not allow him to drive a car alone. I just can't do it. For his safety and for my sanity, I can't allow that to happen. I grieve for him and for myself. Like, what am I going to do with my kid when it's time for him to go to college? Am I going to be this crazy helicopter parent, probably, who doesn't allow him to leave this town to go to school? So those are realities and anxieties that I feel like I deal with most, is when it pertains to my child, and his safety and what his future will look like and what his future will entail for him on a personal level, and what will he be able to do in life that I will allow him to do to keep him safe.
Yeah, I feel, you know, like piggyback off of you, that, you know, we live in a predominantly, you know, white neighborhood, and, you know, I mean, like I said, like my neighbors are great. Like, you know, I get along with all of them, you know, they welcome me in and everything like that. But, you know, it's just the fact that, you know, my son's, you know, he's mixed, like, you know, he's like Black dad, you know, white mom. And, you know, but the world, you know, right now it's summertime, and, you know, I mean, he's really, you know, got really, really dark, like, you know, like, and, you know, like the world will only see him as, you know, Black, like, you know, they won't see, you know, and, you know, I fear for, you know, when he's just with his mom, like, you know, and, you know, they go to the grocery store or something like that, you know, what somebody might say, you know, what somebody might do, like, because, you know, Emily, you know, she loves me, like, but, you know, she hasn't been through, you know, those situations to where, you know, somebody says something, you know, sly or says something racist, like, you know, and how to react to that. And, you know, and we really, I mean, we've talked about it, is like, but, you know, until you actually lived it and until you've actually, you know, it actually happens, then, you know, it's hard to explain. Like, you know, it's hard to explain, like I said, the fear that, you know, most of us have for our kids, like, you know, because, you know, just the fear of, like you said, like, driving, like, it's just like how many people just get put over, and next thing you know, they're not coming home to their family. Like, it's like how many, families are just, chilling on on their porch, or, things like that, so, biggest thing for my son, of course, I don't think he has a problem with seeing both sides, Zach, but, just to get, him to realize that, the world's always going to see him as, as black, no matter, how, white he is, or how, light skinned he may be.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for sharing. Destiney and Gracie, I know that you two do not have children, but someday in the near future, if you do choose to have children, what are your fears for then?
I'll go. So I guess my biggest fear would be if I had a son, which is the same fear I have for my brother and my father, being in a situation where they just see a scary black man and they don't see somebody's father, brother, son, a person, and they just see this threat. And so him being shot or lynched or any sort of specific racial thing against him. And if I had a daughter, I think it would be, people tend to treat black women in two different ways. Either we are the most despicable creatures to ever walk the earth, and we are below black men on the order, or they put us in a position where we are used and looked at almost as Barbies, and they kind of are like, oh, I just wish I had your hair, or I wish I looked exactly like you and I had this black girl look. And so those would be my fears.
Well, thank you. Destiney, would you like to share?
Yeah, sorry, my Wi-Fi went out. I was like, what's happening? So, yeah, I agree with you guys 1000%. Like, it's just scary. Like, you never know what people are going to do and how people are going to react. And I mean, with kids, I mean, I have a love for kids anyway. So it's like, how do people look at this little boy that I see as, just super cute and fun? And it's like, some people look at him and they're like, oh, well, who's he going to turn into in 10 years, And it's like, kids don't need to be looked at like that. And I don't know, it's just scary what people may think or say or do.
Yeah, wow. Again, thank you all so much for sharing. So the next thing I kind of want to ask and talk about is, what words would you guys prefer to, what would you like to be used for your ethnicity? What words hurt you? What words do you prefer to use and for other people to use for you personally? If Terrence would like to share.
Can I say something? I find that interesting question. I don't, I'm 55 years old, and I consider myself a Black American. I lived in Europe, in Italy, for 25 years. I was in the service. And I'm hearing so many things about fear and scaredness. It saddens me to hear people talk like that. Considering if you look at your situation today, of how did you make it to that point? Why would you tell your child to be fearful? I'm just, and my daughter is mixed. My wife is from Italy. My daughter came here for college. So she has a Black father and an Italian mother. And until she came to the States, it was the first time somebody asked her what she was, what's her label. And all this time, she thought she was a military kid just living in Italy with those without those stagnants of labels. Being in the military, I met all type of people. I could tell you this, overseas, when all Americans, black, white, Latinos, Hispanic, when you overseas in a different country and you're on American base, we all look at each other as American. There's no titles after that. But I noticed when we come back to the States, we start to put titles. And when once you put a title on yourself, you must belong to that group now. Because now I'm this, now I'm that. And we're going to talk about police brutality, police injustice, then that's a different topic from racism. I think that affects everybody when police who's supposed to provide us security service, to be the people that keep us safe. But I just think that for me, I don't know for others, but I'm a Black American. I was born in this country. I could go anywhere I want to go. If someone tell me right now to go to Africa, I don't know anything about Africa. I'm American from New Jersey. So, and I keep it only as that. And I try to keep it simple, because when I look at a white person, I don't go to a white person and say, are you Italian white? Are you Irish white? So I have to look at it from that aspect. And you know, my wife, from living overseas, my wife being from Italy and living in the States the past 4 years, she's amazed, because she's like, David, I mean, I try to explain to her, in Italy, everybody's Italian. That's it. Go to Spain, everybody's from Spain, Germany. But she's amazed how much, and my daughter's amazed, that now she has to identify herself when she sees herself only as a college kid, and that's it. Valentina, who grew up over here, and that's it. So I think it's amazing.
Yeah.
That's my comment.
Yeah, David, thank you for answering that. But I think that, like I said, I think I consider myself, like I said, Black. Like, I don't know much about, African culture. Like, and, I don't think that, it would be right for me personally to consider myself, African American. But, would I be offended if somebody, called me that? I don't think so. And, the words that really, offend, are, the only real word I really know, like, is, the N-word, as everybody knows, especially, with the, ER on the end. Like, everybody sees it, but, everybody knows, there's an ER on the end or there's an A on the end. And I feel like that, the Black community, because they said, people wonder why. They're like, why do y'all use it with an A on the end? When you don't want people using it at all. It's like, because sometimes you create something like you've been called like it with the ER on the end, like or your ancestors or your grandma or your mom perhaps or whatever, like been called with the ER on the end. It's like, and then you kind of it's like kind of like not making fun of your pain. It's like, but it's kind of like, making it your own. Like, it's like, I'm not going to let you, use that for what you want to use it for. We're going to use it for what we use it for, which is like, saying it as like, friend, like, cousin, brother. And, and David, like when you say, why, we tell kind of our kids to be like fearful. It's not really like fear. It's like it's more being aware. like, you know, it's being aware of, like, you know, how people perceive you and stuff like that. Because I don't want my kid to be afraid of anything. You know, I don't want him to be afraid of, you know, going, you know, to go try to start a business or go and try to, you know, get that job that, you know, is predominantly, you know, white people get, or things like that, like, you know, and, but he has to be aware, because like that, you know, there might be some things that, you know, that people say, that people do, that people, you know, that he has to try that much harder. But I'm not telling him, you know, to be fearful of it, but, you know, you have to, it's like, you know, be wary of your destination, you know.
Terrence, I agree with you 100%. I'm from New Jersey. I'm from North New Jersey, and my mom's always told me to be aware, always be, and that's around anybody. I always tell people when I was younger, well, most people I had to worry about were people that look like me, you know. So it's I have to be real in a sense of how I have to approach things, and I have learned that it's not about, people will always see my external, but it's what I want them to see, which is my character, what type of person I am. And then if you're not cool with that, I could go my way, you go your way, but we still okay. You know, so I taught my daughter that. You know, I taught my daughter, when you go to the States, you're going to experience some things, but always remember that's not who you are. People are going to say what they want to say. But if you start believing in those things, then you become those things. So you have to say, this is who I am, and keep moving. So I don't want to say fearful, because I'm not fearful, but I don't like the direction that we are going. Not today, 21st century, 2020. Not to a person of my age who has the ability to travel, ability to speak another language. And I think about racism and slavery. I look at it different, because back in those days, those people couldn't even speak their own language. They couldn't even read a book. They couldn't go anywhere. So I have to take what they did and use it to my strengths, you know, to keep going, and then have my daughter keep going. In 400 years, I tell people it's like a race. This is 400 years. The race is still going. It's going to take another 400 at least to catch up. The head start is there, but it don't mean that we stop running. We don't stop the race. You know, we maintain that and stay on the track, and not get how you say, confused, or people put other distractions in front of us. And maybe because I lived out of the country for so long, I have been able to see something so different. I have seen it that it can coexist. But I realized when I came back to the States, it can't coexist, because we all think the same way. Black people think this way, white people think that way. And it's like this. It will never get to another point.
Yeah, thank you, David, for popping on and sharing. Courtney, what are your thoughts on all of this? What do you feel when it comes to people talking about your ethnicity and your choice words?
Sure. So getting back to kind of those offensive words, of course, the N-word, like, duh, let's not use that one. But I think for me, it's even on a realm that might be worse than that word, is colored. That is like 100% trigger. I'll come unglued at hearing that one. Even worse, I think, than hearing the N-word. That one just like, whoa, crazy. Being a medical provider, I have cared for lots of adults in our region, from Upper East Tennessee way down all the way into Knoxville at some points. And I think that's the word that has hurt me the worst as a provider, is walking into a room and having a patient actually tell me that and say, oh, you're a nice colored girl. Am I really? So that one to me is the most offensive, and one that I can't stand. To hop back onto what Terrence was saying, you know, and to what David was saying as well, like, we are not from Africa. I've never been to the continent. I hope to go someday. I hope to visit. I hope to do some work there, some sort of mission work there at some point in my life. But we unfortunately had that culture stolen away from us when enslaved Africans were brought here. So we, and to our discredit, we don't have any knowledge of that, none that is maybe accurate anyway, from our ancestral beginnings. So that's something that, for me, African American is not offensive. It's our very USA PC correct term to say. But I would agree with David in saying, you know, I'm a Black American. I'm a Black person. I was born here. I don't have any amazing knowledge that I maybe should have or would want to have of my ancestral beginnings. So the African American is not offensive, but in my personal opinion, it's like, well, yeah, I'm not that, but sure, you know, it's just the term that we have adopted as correct.
Sorry, go ahead, McKenna.
Go ahead.
A lot of the words that we're talking about pertain mostly to someone who is obviously Black. For me, though, I've been called things like an Oreo, any kind of like black and white thing you can put together, zebras. I've been called a mulatto, all of those things. Mulatto is like what that'll like really get me. It gets me hot immediately. And I don't know if I think it's Grace. Yeah. Gracie, yeah. I'm sure she might have been called some of these names, or she might even know more that have been directed at people who are Black, but were not as Black as other Black people, if that makes sense. And that goes on to your original question of what should we be called. And I agree with Courtney and Terrence and David. I'm not African American. And we don't ask any white people, hey, what are you? Are you Italian American? Are you German American? Because to me, an African American is someone who came from the continent of Africa and immigrated, was not enslaved, immigrated to America. That's an African American. Someone who came from Zimbabwe or South Africa and now they live in America. That's an African American. I am not an African American. I'm a Black American. With a capital B. And that's all.
So I'll say I really like, I say I'm a person of color, Black. I like that. I personally find it really offensive when people say, I don't see color. No, you absolutely 100% see color. You walk into a room and you can tell who's Black and who's not, and who's white and who's not. And so see, when people tell me, when they're like, oh, I just try to focus on the content of people's character instead of the color of their skin, I'm like, that's really hurtful, because what you're saying is you don't see me. Right. You don't understand that other people treat me and people like me badly because of the color of our skin. So that's extremely hurtful. Yeah, I've heard zebra, Oreo. People used to call me an inside out Oreo because I look whiter on the outside and passing. And so they would be like, oh, you're just an inside out Oreo, which drove me crazy. I've heard zebra too. What else have I heard? I've heard a lot of things where it's like, oh my gosh, it's kind of like a speckled cow because you're a little black and a little white. And it's like, what? So I've heard a lot of that. I truly feel like also saying the we're all American thing kind of blatantly disregards the fact that there's racism in every country. So to say, oh, don't see me as Black, just see me as American, you're negating the fact that racism exists everywhere, and it's a systemic issue, not an American issue.
Right.
They're protesting in Europe. They're protesting in Canada. Like, it's not just a us issue. So I would say person of color, which I find to be best. I love that for me. And I find it best not to say I don't see color, or to try to say, oh, everybody's just American.
I just want to, I'm sorry. For me, person of color, see, now this is a different thing, and like, just because we're both biracial, we don't have the same standards. Because to me, person of color, that includes Latinos, that includes any kind of like Asian American person, someone from Thailand, etc. Those people are brown, you know, they have color. So to me, person of color is inaccurate. That lumps us all together. If you say, if we're focusing on Black people, then that makes more, to me, it's more accurate to say Black rather than person of color. So, I mean, that's also accurate, but it's not as accurate as it could be, if that makes sense to me.
Yeah. Can I add one thing? When I was in Italy, there's a lot of Africans over there. And when I first went, I think I was 20, 21. This is when I realized I wasn't an African American, because I had a brother from Ghana who told me that I was American. It was weird, you know, that I had another brother tell me, you know, because I don't know if y'all too young to remember, but back in the day, we used to wear these little medallions that had the shape of Africa on it. And the guy came up to us, a whole bunch of Americans came up to us, and he started giving us a history on Africa. And so at that moment, it made me do some reflection, you know, on that I have who I was, where I come from, and what is my culture. And I could see him from Ghana. He had such a strong culture of being from Ghana, and I couldn't relate to that. So for me, that's the reason why I had to reevaluate my thoughts.
Yeah. Thank you. So just a reminder, let's post questions in the chat box. Thank you so much for everyone talking about all that. I think we're all really learning a lot, and so I'm excited to continue on.
Could I chime in just for a quick second? My name's Ladawn Hudgins, and I just wanted to, I don't know everybody on here, but I just want to kind of give a real quick little history lesson, because I've been listening here, and I just wanted to understand, words are what we have been labeled over the years. It has evolved, and it's just come around. You know, again, we know that the N-word is very offensive, but one of the things I taught my children, words we know are powerful. And my daughter used this example once when somebody called her the N-word. And she said, after I taught her, I said, is that with the AR or is that with the ER? And the person looked like, what in the world? And because AR is the offensive word to somebody of color like me, but the other word is just for somebody who's drunk. So which one am I? And the person looked at my daughter and just walked away. On my birth certificate, because I haven't heard this yet, but my parents were labeled as Negro. Now that word is offensive to me. So colored is just a revolving word, because if you've lived as long as I have, you've seen the term from somebody who's a colored person, then we know that the N-word is definitely offensive. But then we were Negro, and then we were African Americans, and now we're Black Americans, but now we're revolved around to where we're just people of color. So you live long enough, trust me, like I have, and who knows, we may go back to something else. So it just depends on the generation you were brought up in, how long you've lived here on this earth, okay? So I'll just say this, because if anybody that's done the, obviously I'm not a millennial, I'm a baby boomer, okay? So if you guys can look that up and kind of figure out where that starts. But I just wanted to share with some of you millennials that are on here. I've been there, I've seen it. I was around when Dr. Martin Luther King was killed. I saw when the National Guard were driving up and down my street in full gear and was all about the curfew. I've seen my neighborhoods burn down. And when you hear the media talk about it takes years, if those communities and those businesses will ever be rebuilt. My husband's from Newark, New Jersey. And when we got married, I'm originally from Ohio. He's from New Jersey. And when he took me around, same thing. My husband said during when Martin Luther King Jr. was shot and really threw up his upbringing, he said he had to lay away from the window because of people shooting. So it's this time has been very, very, maybe I've looked at it from, if you want to call me an old fart or an old person, that's fine. But I just want you to understand, when we're talking about, I just want to go back to this talking about name thing. Okay, we know people see the color first, because that's one thing I taught my children. I'm a school speech language pathologist, and my kids saw it when they would go with me on field trips and see how special needs kids were discriminated against or made fun of because of their disabilities. My children have been ridiculed because their dad's an engineer and their mom is a school speech language pathologist. My kids have been ridiculed and talked about because they talk white. And I'm hearing some of you gentlemen that have already talked, been speaking on here. And that's something, again, that we have had to deal with in my own home. And I get furious when people say, you talk white? No, I'm sorry, but I just happen to talk proper English. That's my job. So I just kind of wanted to bring that little bit of a history as far as, and Courtney, I get it. My daughter worked in retail forever. And you would be surprised when she would come up and have the little ladies come up to her and say, I didn't know that you were the division manager, you know, the little colored girl. So I understand you getting offended, but again, remember, for you younger people, that was their generation. So to them, it's not offensive. It's not. Does it make it right? No. But you have to understand generationally, and you're right. I get that the whole thing about being systemic. Trust me. People have looked at me and said, you know, I know what it's like to be the only one in my career. But I didn't look at it as something to be ashamed of. I took it as a teaching moment because I understand. My brother went to the Ohio State, and his first roommate said, I'm going to have to, you know, after the 2-week freeze, I don't know how it is, but back in the day, you had to wait 2 weeks before you were able to move out. And he said he had never seen a black, this is in Columbus, Ohio. He said he had never seen a black person before, let alone live with one. But did my brother take offense to that? No. Everybody on here, this is a teaching moment. I put in the chat box, it's about relationships. That's what I tried to teach my kids. Now look, I faced racism smack in the face, but it wasn't until I was in college. And this young lady looked at me and just said, I don't like you because you're black. And you know what my first response was? Are you kidding me? I'm the best thing that you're ever going to get to know. But that was her loss, not mine. That was her loss. And we all have to get to a point now, because just listen, as quiet as it's kept, there's just as many Black people that don't want to get to know white people as well. So what are we going to do, people? What are we going to do? I believe you're all professionals, and if you're not, you're aspiring to be professionals. But what are we going to do at this time? I never thought I would live to see this again, people. And I'm living it again, and I shouldn't have to. This is the 21st century. It has got to stop. I agree. I don't disagree with what is offensive, but it's how you deal with the offense. It's how you deal. Are you going to just, smack somebody upside the head or, whatever? No. If you do, you may not have a job. You may go to jail. You may get shot. I don't know. But we all have to get to a point where we don't wear this, our little feelings on our sleeves. Let's all grow up. Let's all, understand that yes. One more story and then I'm done. My first teaching assignment was with Boston City School System in 1978. Ooh, I know I'm old, right? Okay, that's okay. All right, but this was the deal. Black teachers actually in 1978 had to get a police escort to go into South Boston because, again, this was still, integrating schools, South Boston, just about all white Irish, as a matter of fact, okay? Black teachers still had to get a police escort if they taught in those schools, in the school systems, or in that part of Boston. This is when you had the affirmative action program. I saw it work in my case, but I saw where they hired another Black special or speech language pathologist. And when we would have meetings, she would ask these questions. And I'm looking like, I learned that in my sophomore practicum. So one thing my parents taught me, if I have to pull out the race card, I don't need the job. I need to be hired on what I was taught, how I was trained, and I'm the best one for the position.
Yeah, I think what you said. Thank you for sharing your story. What you said about relationships, it's not just a white thing. Like you said, there's some Black people that don't want, just don't want to break that barrier, and to bring us all together, we have to, break that barrier, build that bridge, and together, and cross it together. It's because if not, then we'll be like you said, I'll be 80 years old looking at the same thing, and hopefully we figure out something before then. Because like I said, I'm doing this because I don't want my son to have to go through the same thing, as I can. And that's pretty much it.
I think, Ladawn, it creates such a visceral reaction because it has been going on since the dawn of man, and no one can discredit that fact. And we don't discredit anything that those before us have done, because without your generation, we wouldn't be here. But I think that visceral reaction is because of that. Like, here we are again, exactly what you said, here we are again. So, the civil rights movement brought us a few steps closer and a few steps towards change, but here we are and we've taken 1,000 steps back. So how can we continue to create safe environments? How can we continue to create safe dialogue amongst everyone? It's a grand question and one that's for the ages. I'm honestly not optimistic that we will ever see the glory that we all want to see until we reach heaven. If you're a believer, believe that. That's when we will get our glory, not here on the earth. So that visceral response is warranted, but also for me personally, it's one that I can't allow myself to like live in that space, because it's not going to change anything until we get people in high places to make decisions on our behalf. Then we're not going to see anything change. And the civil rights movement brought us a long way. We did have some persons in places to try and evoke some change, but they were unfortunately murdered. So, you know, until we can put people in seats that will be helpful for us and for all people who are change agents and make proper changes to help us and all people, are we ever going to see any of these things change? No, we're not. And you know, this conversation can go on for decades and eons, and we can argue and we can debate, but ultimately, like, what are the solutions? Well, what are the solutions? Again, those are questions for the ages. What are the solutions? The solutions are trying to allow safe places and safe discussions like this one that we're having, allowing people to ask those questions that they maybe aren't comfortable asking. You know, my coworkers and I have been having some very interesting conversations. And I'm like, ask me what you want to know. Tell me what you want to know. Ask me anything. Like, this is a safe place. You know, I'm a safe person. You can ask maybe some of those hard questions that you haven't wanted to ask a Black friend before. And a few of them have said, well, I've just been scared I'm going to say the wrong thing. Well, ask. You know, we're here, we're open. We want to hear your thoughts. We want to know your thoughts. We want to know what your opinions are. And if it is something that is offensive, like, allow that to be a teaching moment. Allow me to educate you on why you shouldn't say X, Y, Z, or why you shouldn't do X, Y, Z. So again, you know, this conversation I feel like was not elementary disrespectfully, but on an elementary level, so that people could come in and have a place to have some safe discussion.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. This is exactly how I wanted this to go. This is a great discussion. And what Ms. Courtney was saying kind of goes into our next question. What is something that you wish people, especially white people, would take the next step to make everything better?
So I would say, for me, I really hate when people say Black people make it better, because while we can do things and we obviously are out there and we're trying to help and we're trying to readjust things and create systems in place, when you put that on us, it puts systemic racism on us. It says it's our problem to fix, when in reality, we have systemic racism because of white people. That's why we have it. And so it is also a white people problem, which means that people have to first accept that it is a thing, accept that racism still exists. I hear all the time from people in Carter and Washington and Sullivan County, oh, that doesn't happen here. Racism, it absolutely happens. I see it at football games. I see it at basketball games. I hear all the time about ETSU's players. So it's accepting that it exists, and it's saying, okay, what can I do not to be not racist, but anti-racist? Because in this society, it is not enough to say, I'm not racist. You have to say, I am anti-racist, and I am working towards helping readjust and dismantle and recreate all the systems that are disproportionately affecting Black people, like the criminal justice system, policing, which is a part of it, but it kind of is separate, the educational system, institutional racism, which I also have experienced, is a big thing. You know, when I first started going to ETSU, everybody was so friendly and so nice, but I have a friend that went to a college in Georgia, and she didn't even make it on campus 3 days in a predominantly Black area, where they asked her why she was even in college, because they knew she was just going to end up at Burger King. So we have to really, you know, put it on both parties and say that this is an issue and we're all going to come together and fix it. And it starts with open dialogue conversations within local government, state government, and federal government.
I would also like to chime in and say, um, kids aren't born, again, systemic. It starts in the home. What's being taught? What's being said? What kind of reactions are there when there's something in, whether it's on TV or in a movie? Um, it's so important that that's just one of, I'd say, a suggestion is the home. What is being said? What is being taught? I absolutely agree. If anybody on this Zoom would pick up the book, we just did a book study. It's called White Fragility, and it talks about this issue about, and the book was written by a white woman, and how she has approached racism, and how unfortunately in this country it's people run from it. They give those cliches of, well, I have Black friends, or but it's more than that. It's just what you said, Gracie. It is within our system. And but I would I like what David talked about, as far as talking to his child. I told you I work in the schools. One of my favorite stories is a group of second graders. The little one came in and was all excited. Miss Hudgins, I got a joke. I said, what is it? He said, what's black and orange? And I'm naming all these animals and things. He said, no, it's an ant eating Cheetos. And before I could react, the other students, they were all white, mind you, were just appalled. They were like, do you know what you just said, blah, blah. And this little one got tears in his eyes. And I said, honey, who told you that joke? My papa. It starts at home. That would be a good place to start. I'm not saying that's the end all or the be all, but what are you telling your children? What are they seeing? What are they hearing? We all know that kids are going to imitate what they see, what they hear. They're going to mimic everything. So that would just be one of my suggestions. What can we do? Let's start at home with our kids and our grandkids.
Yeah, and I agree. Because like I said, I made a video about basically, starting at home, because it doesn't matter, what we teach them, is that because most of the time, they're with their parents. But, I've, as a coach, most of the kids, spend time, if you've ever played a sport in high school, most of the kids spend time, with their, high school coach, or, really with their friends more than their parents. So, one, I would, if, I don't care if you don't have a Black friend, I feel like you need to have that discussion, because, it could come up at any time. And, one way, like you said, Gracie was saying, one way to fix it is, we can't ignore it. You can't just say it doesn't exist. It's because, you can't fix a problem that doesn't exist. It's there's no, just like a math problem, there can't be a solution, without the problem. First we have to, admit that, and that's just being just being an adult, and being, because it starts with, if we view our, everybody was a kid once before. And I mean, if we, I guess you channel your, inner kid, it's and you just want to go play on the playground, with whoever, it didn't matter back then, whoever was on the playground, it's it didn't matter what color they were, it's just, I see a kid that wants to play tag with me, I see a kid that wants to, swing on the swings with me, and that's where, and that's where we have to get, at some point, like you said, people are being taught this, at some point we're being taught to not to worry about, the color of their skin, who, who you swing with, who you play tag with, and who you hang out with, and things like that. And and I think that if our leaders step out and bring us together, of course talking about government, president, all everyone like that. It starts with them because they're supposed to be the leaders of all of us, and of course we're all a leader in ourselves. But if that would be the easy solution, but nothing's ever that easy. But I think that if the president, we gotta we just have to want more out of all of them. Our government, we have to want more of all of them just to come together and find a solution, for everybody. Because and not forget about the two parties, forget about all that. It's it's just we're all coming for one goal, and this one goal is equality. Not true equality, not saying that land of the free, home of the brave. It's just actually being not just saying, but being the land of the free and home of the brave. And having true equality for each and every person.
Excellent point. Karlyssa, would you like to share your thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, I was thinking as Gracie was talking, she was talking about how we need to be focusing on systemic racism and how do we dismantle these systems, the infrastructure in place that has been infiltrated by racism. And it's more than just raising your kids how they should be. It's more than that, because we have to go into the criminal justice system. We have to go into the policing. We have to go into our education system. We have to go into our healthcare system and break these biases and start over. Because starting at home isn't going to do you any good if you're a Black mother and you're dead because of the Black maternal mortality crisis. It's not going to do you any good. It's not going to do you any good if you start at home and you know what you're supposed to be doing and you're gunned down by the police. It doesn't matter if you've been taught what you should be at home, if out in the world, in school, you're getting pamphlets that say, pros and cons of slavery. It doesn't matter if you're getting what you're supposed to get at home, if what you're getting from everywhere else is less than. It doesn't matter. And so more than starting at home, which we should, more than that, we have to be active. All of us have to go into all of these systems because it's infiltrated every single one. Just getting access to nutritious food. I mean, that's an issue. That's a race issue. You don't think it is, but it is. We just have to go into these systems and really break it down. We have to really put people in place, our legislators, our mayors, our police chiefs, et cetera, all the way up to president, our governors, everyone. We have to elect people who care about these issues. We have to elect people who will write laws. We have to lobby, we have to call all these people, we have to do all the things. We can't just be passive. And I think America is really coming to a boiling point because we haven't identified, we haven't talked about how we've stolen this land from the indigenous people who were here. We haven't talked about the terrible things of slavery. We haven't gone into that 400-year history. We haven't dealt with those sins, and all of those things are coming back to bite us now. And personally, I feel just a teeny bit envious of Generation Z because race wasn't really talked about when I was growing up. It really wasn't. You knew you were Black, you knew your family was Black, you knew they were white, but it wasn't something that, it definitely wasn't anything like it is today. where we can have a Zoom discussion where we can talk about these things together. And so I think really Generation Z is going to be your generation, McKenna. I think your generation is, and Gracie and Destiney, I think it's your generation who's really going to push us past and really I just think great things are happening, all these protests and all the things. And so anyway, my whole thing is we have to be more diligent. We have to be vigilant about being active in anti-racism. You have to call out your racist uncle at Thanksgiving. You have to call out your racist teacher at school. You have to call out your racist coach, your racist coworkers, even if they're doing things that they don't know are racist. Because most of the people who are doing racist things, they don't think that they're superior to Black people. I mean, at least in my heart of hearts, I hope not, Lord help. But I don't think that for the most part, people are trying to be racist when they're being racist. They're simply going along with what's always been taught and what the standard is. And so I think if we educate people on these systems and then dismantle the parts of those systems that we need to, then we can get going to where we need to go. Then, and only then, will systemic racism be done.
Yeah, and I think that I lived in Memphis for almost 2 years, and it's completely reversed from where I live now because it is predominantly Black, and where I live is predominantly white. But one thing that seems to always go is Memphis is unsafe. Oh, it's unsafe. Well, Memphis is really not that bad. Yes, there's gangs, and yes, there's things, but if you go to any major beach city, Miami, Tampa, Myrtle Beach, you're going to find just as much. The difference is it's not predominantly Black there. And so saying that, oh, we need to start fixing this at home is ignoring that anytime more than a few Black people are together, it's considered a dangerous situation. In Memphis, they kind of have a rule of thumb, and it's if you see more than 10 Black men together, assume it's a gang. And that's horrific. And that's, I don't think anybody wants that society, but when you say start at home and then you go to Memphis and the rule is more than 10 Black people and it's a gang, your one person is not going to help if you don't say something. If you're just sitting in your car while they're getting pulled over by the police for being a gang and saying to Tommy in the back seat, oh, they're not a gang, this is bad, this is horrible, see, this is what happens to Black people all the time, then you're not really helping. You're part of the problem.
Okay, let me clarify what I mean by home, because I understand what you ladies are saying. And trust me, I work in the schools for one thing, so I see it all the time, okay? I know what you talked about as far as hunger. Kids aren't going to learn if they're hungry. Kids aren't going to learn if they're sleepy because there may be domestic violence going on or whatever in the home. I understand that there is a lot of there's single parent homes. Hey, great grandparents are raising their kids nowadays. So I understand what you're saying. I totally understand as far as this being a systemic issue. But one thing I just want to throw out there, and we have a cliche, I'm going to throw this skunk out there. It's going to stink up a little bit, but that's okay. We can't change everything, all these systems. What I like to see, we talk about, what we can do. Maybe, like you said, I know it is going to be, trust me, a government thing. As an educator, I cannot tell you how many passive educators we have out there that go, well, I don't want to get involved with politics. Well, these are the people that are making the rules for educators, for teachers. These are the people that will control our raises. So I get that, trust me. I understand that. But we can't change it all. We can't change all these systems. So where do we start? Maybe the question needs to be, let's have a hierarchy. What is the most important? is it our criminal justice system? Is it whatever? But if there is a movement to do it all, it's not. So maybe right now, starting with the police, starting with our criminal justice system, maybe that is a starting point. And then we could go, because you were talking about, listen, it bothers me that there isn't more talking about, listen, I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but I was at a conference once with a teacher in Texas like 10 years ago. And they were talking about how they wanted to take everything out from the Emancipation Proclamation through the Civil Rights Movement out of history books. And I'm sitting there going, how in the world can you remove that from a history book? You can't do that. How can you do that?
Well,
to me, that's like taking away my history. You can't do that. And we don't need just a Black history class.
Yeah.
We don't need that.
So much. We love hearing your points of views. We are running short on time, so I have a lot of our panelists, and we will hopefully be doing a Q&A at the end. So feel free to have as many questions in the chat box as you would like. So Destiney, how do you feel about what's going on at like MTSU? What are some of your thoughts on that?
Can you please repeat that, McKenna? I'm sorry.
You're good. So what are your thoughts on like how are we seeing change at MTSU? Because I know you're a college student. For your generation that you're spending a lot of your time with in school learning, how is it going there?
So it 1000% is a culture shock being from here, which is predominantly white, and going to Murfreesboro where everyone's from Memphis or Nashville and Knoxville, and there's a lot of Black people down there. And it just is what it is. And my roommate last year was from Memphis, and it was just weird to me, I guess. I guess I shouldn't say weird. It was different. Her being from Memphis and me being from Elizabethton, because we were from different ends of the state. We would say things and not know what the other person was talking about. Like she would say something, I'd be like, okay, can you break that down for me? Because I've never heard that before. And she was like, what do you mean you've never heard that? And I'm like, I've never heard it. And she was like, and I would say things that, like people saying Memphis is scary. That's what I've always heard. I've never been to Memphis. So I would say something to her. She'd be like, oh, we went so-and-so in Memphis. And I'm like, oh, were you not scared? And she'd be like, Destiny, you can't say that. Like, that's mean. And I'm like, I had no clue. And it definitely is different. And I am very country. So people say. I don't think I'm that country, but people say I am country. And yeah, people will look at me like in class and they'll be like, what are you saying? Can you repeat that? Or why do you talk like that? You're Black. And I'm like, it doesn't matter what the color of my skin is. It's like, that's where I'm from. That's how I've always talked. Sorry, I'm not changing that. Like, I can't. So yeah, it's definitely different. And being in college, people do have voices. Some of them are louder than others. And yeah, there's just no telling what people will say or do. So
thank you so much for sharing. So another question is, have you ever experienced people not believing your stories about racist acts, of people not believing your story of what you have been through? If Terrence wants to answer.
Yeah, there was somebody that shared my article from the Elizabeth Star, and one person commented on it. They said, racism doesn't live here. Racism doesn't. It's like everybody's saying, we all bleed the same, everything like that. And I'm like, that's like me saying, like, never being to your house and saying your lights work. Like, I don't know. Like, it's like, I don't know until I actually go in and see, and see everything. Like, and, I've had a lot of people say that, and it just makes me feel like that you're just trying to be ignorant, like it's just you're just trying to be set in your ways and be and not see not see outside of your outside of your box, and I think that I think that hopefully that this thing helps people see the other side, because I went to church. One of my friends, he spoke, his pastor and him spoke, and he used a Aquafina bottle. It was like, but he's like it says purified purified water on this side. He's like, but to y'all, but on me, I have the ingredients on this side. So it's just like, seeing the other side of the bottle. Like, it's like, you won't believe me until you open your eyes and try to see it from my point of view. And I mean, that's with anything. Like, that's me seeing it from, I guess, a white person's point of view too. Like, it's like for, because some people like, oh, that's all they know. Like, it's like, but, there comes a point in time in everybody's life, no matter what you've been taught, is that you have to choose, choose what you believe in. It's like, I don't care. You might be, 6 years old. It's like, are you still gonna blame it on your parents for, raising you that way? Like, it's just like, you have to, at some point you have to, man up or, woman up and choose the way of, being the right way.
Miss Courtney, what are your thoughts on all of this? How do you feel?
About people not believing stories or not believing that it still exists. I feel like maybe locally that is a common thought. And, maybe we're the South, we're kind, we have our communities that we've been enthralled in and that we've grown up inside of, and one of those, like, everybody kind of knows everybody type scenarios. So I feel like people locally might think that, well, that doesn't happen here. We don't get these largely viral episodes that happen in our area. We don't have, thank God, like killings that happen in our area. Not that it can't happen here, and that's the thing. People don't need to be naive enough to believe that something that happens around the country, specifically things that have happened recently in Georgia or things that have happened recently in Minnesota, can't happen in little tiny Johnson City or can't happen in little tiny Elizabethton. We are one person away from having that happen at any given moment. So I think it's immature of any of us to believe that we are exempt, because we're definitely not exempt in this area. And maybe it's because we feel a little protected or sheltered growing up in this area and being such tight-knit communities, but it absolutely does exist in very subtle ways. Things continue to happen, maybe from day to day on someone's workplace, maybe from day to day from other people's relatives. It happens. It's absolutely still very much alive and well. And until we choose to really recognize that this thing's still happening, then we're not going to be successful in our feeble attempts to overcome it. So I just feel like, the first step to recovery is admitting you have a problem. So if we don't admit that we still have this problem, we're not going to get to the point of having recovery.
Yes, thank you so much. Miss Karlyssa, have you had any experiences from stuff like that?
Experiencing racism and then talking about it and people not believing me. Not really, not very often at least, because a lot of the things that happened to me that were racist when I was younger, I didn't realize they were racist, because that's just what everyone did. I suffered from a form of what I call complementary racism, where it's things that Gracie talked about, like, oh my God, your skin is so beautiful. I would love to have a tan year round. Or how do you get so dark? Like, because I'm Black, that's how I get so dark. What do you mean? Melanin. Anyway, sorry. But yeah, so you're so exotic looking. I got that often. Or where are you from? I'm from here. No, but like, where are your parents from? They too are from here. We're all from Northeast Tennessee. We're all from here. And so it's the complementary racism is like, you don't belong here. You're not one of us. So why are you here? It's immediately questioning why are you here? How did you get here? So let's see. Yeah, so those are most of the things that I suffered from, or from white friends who would say, you know, you talk so white, or Black friends who would say, you talk so white, or never being Black enough for your Black friends, or not ever being white enough for your white friends. So I don't know, I'm kind of on a tangent, and my husband just came out of the room, so I'm gonna mute myself.
Thank you, Ms. Karlyssa. It's a great point. So now we're going to start answering some questions from the chat box. Would any of you guys like to talk about the Confederate flag or statues? Terrence, if you would like to take that over.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, being like I said, we're from Carter County, so you see, that's kind of all you see, to be honest. Like, I've had, to be honest, I've been friends that have, I've been friends with people that have, Confederate flag hanging and things like that. Like, it's really like, I don't think, seeing it, like, you're on the side of precaution, like, because one, you don't know if they're just taught just to have the Confederate flag hanging from the back of the truck, or they're just or they're taught what it was actually about, like, and and that's and they look at you that way. So I don't I mean, I've met some of the nicest people that have, like, Confederate flag hats and bananas, everything like that. So I've had a different experience than some people on here. It's like, but I don't think that it's like from the history, like as per se, like it pertains to be offensive. It's like, but from a personal standpoint, like, from my experience, like, I haven't really had somebody, like, waving in my face, or like, using it as a, I guess, defense mechanism for being racist or anything like that. So that's from my take on it.
So I would say that my take on it is a little different. I think that anytime you fly a flag in a war that was, people say states' rights, but it was the states' rights to own slaves. So anytime I hear somebody say, oh, it was about states' rights, it really bothers me. Another thing is people saying, have this patriotic view of, oh, my ancestor fought in this war and he was American, and so now I have to fly it. Is for lack of better term, it's idiotic, because what they did was fly a flag that is the flag, not even the real flag, it is one of the state flags, not the actual Confederate flag of the Confederate States of America. And, you know, it was, they seceded. They were traitors to their country, which therefore, by definition, makes that flag anti-American, because they were trying to part from our country. For the statues, what I have to say about that is you do not walk around Germany and see statues of Hitler or any of the Nazis, because they were horrific. They killed many Germans. They killed many of their own people trying to create this whole thing. And the same thing happened with the Confederacy. Putting up a Robert E. Lee statue says, I hate my country, so I'm going to glorify the man that fought to secede from this country. And people say, put it in a museum. Don't put it in a museum. You don't see museums with Hitler in it, like statues of Hitler, because it glorifies the people that were harming people. It doesn't glorify the victims. If it were to glorify the victims and the history of it, you would have a statue of Harriet Tubman, or you would have a statue of a slave, not a statue of people that wanted to leave so that they could keep people in enslavement.
Awesome. Thank you, Miss Gracie. Courtney, anything to add?
Nothing really to add there significant. Personally, I feel like, you know, symbols are symbols. For some people, those are absolutely negative symbols. And for some people, they want to give those symbols a power or a perception that is not right. I feel like we can only allow symbols to invoke what we give them. So if we give those symbols that sort of power, then we also then have the power to remove those symbols and to take them away and to give them what their real meaning is, which are majority negative meanings. So we can't, do I care if they're tearing them down? Like, no, I don't care, tear them down. They're negative symbols. For some people, like, I'll be thrashed for that, but that's just the truth of the matter. They're negative symbols. And for those who choose to give them or want to try to give them a positive symbolism, it's just wrong. It's just not the case.
I would like to add that all of those statues, they were erected, and I don't know, because I was messaging someone, I don't know if this has already been said, but they were erected during the Jim Crow era as a means of terror on Black people. They weren't put up immediately after the Civil War. No. They were put up 100 years after the Civil War to show you, hey, you think you're big and bold now? No. Let me remind you of where you came from. That's exactly why they were brought up. They weren't brought up to be, I mean, I guess they were to celebrate, but I mean, I don't know, who puts up statues of losers? I mean, I don't know, but anywho, that's why they were put up. So there's that.
Yeah, excellent point. Do any of you want to talk about systematic racism and how we can undo institutions that are designed to benefit white people?
Wait, say that again. I'm sorry.
So do any of you guys want to talk about systematic racism and how institutions are benefited to white people and white supremacy?
I mean, let's go first. Okay, let's start with mass incarceration, the war on drugs, being tough on law and order. Let's start on all that, because all of that is being exploited by Black bodies, that we're exploiting Black people to make profits for mass incarceration. We incarcerate people who use crack more than people who use cocaine, because crack is predominantly used by Black people. and cocaine is predominantly used by white people. And so what do? We up the ante, and we start making the sentences for crack 3 and 4 times the sentence lengths, the mandatory minimums for that of cocaine, for that of its fancy counterpart. So mass incarceration in the entire criminal justice system, which includes police brutality, includes all of it, that to me is one of the worst parts of racism, because we've broken families apart. We've taken men from their homes. We've taken women from their homes. We've left children childless, parentless. It's just modern day lynching, in my opinion. Mass incarceration is all you're doing is just taking. Sorry, my baby's waking up. You're just taking. You're still taking someone away from their families, and unrightfully so. And Terrence just talked about 13th on Netflix in the chat box. If you haven't seen that, you should 100% watch it. It is incredibly eye-opening, and that's my homework for everyone, because I might have to leave here in a minute to nurse my baby. So if I do, you should all watch 13th.
I put it in the comments so everybody could see it. But like, there's one, I made one note from watching it, and it says, the U.S. is home of 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners. It's like one in 4 human beings, are behind bars in the U.S. Like, I was like, just think about that. Like, that's pretty, pretty crazy to think about. Like, and if you go on there, it's really eye opening. Like, it even opened my eyes just to say, because I didn't even know that statistic, and I didn't, it's just crazy how some of the things that, in the world that happen, it just repeats itself. We're just going in circles instead of, breaking the line and, trying to, go forward. So, with that, like, I've seen some people that don't think that, white privilege is a thing. Like, and at some, in some cases, it's not, white privilege is not, saying that, like, oh, you're better than me. It's saying like, oh, like, yeah, you might have to, you might know somebody that's white that had to, that doesn't really have much at all. Like, is living, from, check to check, and living, can barely, get food and everything like that. It's like, that's, the thing with, white privilege is because, if you look at it the same, like if we're in the same shoes, I'm still, one step behind you. Like, it's like, and that's way, it's kind of have to open your eyes, because it's just like, I don't know if y'all seen it, but there's a guy that had, everybody in line, and then it was for a race for $100, and he said, he kept on naming stuff, he said, if take 2 steps forward if you have 2 parents in the same household, take 2 steps forward if you have if you don't ever had to worry about a meal, take 2 steps forward if if you don't have to pay for your own cell phone bill, take 2 steps forward if if you've always if you got a car when you're 16, like all, he kept on going and going, as like, and then, most of the people in the back were either, Hispanic or Black. And I wish, I wish I could find the thing because I'll put it in the comments. Is like, but it's really eye opening just to see. Is that because it's not, I think, I mean, I can only speak from a Black perspective, but I think I feel like some white people take offense to that when you say they have white privilege, like it's like, and I don't mean it in an offense way. It's like at all. It's like, but it's just it's just the way the world is. It's like because if we go for a job, like it's like on Wall Street, it's like you think you don't see it. It's like, but you think that they're gonna if we have the same statistics, you think that they're gonna hire me over you, like no matter what I've done, no matter what I've accomplished, like it's like so yeah, that's my take on it.
Thank you. Destiney, do you have any examples of something a white person has said to you recently about police brutality or systemic racism where they thought they were being supportive, but they really weren't?
So right now I can't think of anything. Actually, yeah. So at work last week, maybe the week before, these people, I used to work at Dunkin', and they were talking over the headset, about everything that has happened recently and what's going on. And I, of course, just didn't get in it. I was minding my own business. I was like, they're having a conversation. I'm going to let them do them. And then one of them came up to me and was like, so what do you think about all this? And I was like, well, and I gave them my thoughts. And they were like, oh, well, why do you think that instead of what we're saying? And I'm like, well, because that's how I feel. You feel how you feel. Like, why do you feel the way that you feel? And no one could give me an answer as to why they felt any different or why I should have felt the same way. And the way that I look at things right now with all these protests and everything is most of the people that are protesting right now are white. And it's because Black people are scared to go out and voice their opinion because of what just happened and what may happen to them if they show their face in these big crowds. So people are always like, well, why are you not voicing your opinion on everything? And I'm like, because there's no need for me to, because it's not going to be heard, more than likely. My voice is not going to be heard in most situations. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. Courtney, anything to add on to that?
Sure, I'll agree with what Destiney said. I feel like we keep saying this word fear. I'm absolutely fearful for myself, for my husband, for my dad, for my brother, for anybody that looks like me, especially in the current climate. I'm fearful in this area. I'm sometimes a little worried, like, oh, I don't know if I really need to go to Walmart today. That can wait. So I feel like if we disregard our fear, if we discredit that, are we doing ourselves a disservice? But when others don't really choose to acknowledge that, they are absolutely doing us a disservice because we are fearful. We are fearful to go exercise our right to peaceful protest because maybe we will be the person singled out if an illegal event were to take place. So I hear what she's saying there. And that has been seen even in recent activity. It's not the Black people who are necessarily in every incident causing illegal activity or doing activities that are unwarranted. Other people are coming in and kind of hijacking that space that has been created to try and evoke some sort of sensible change.
Thank you so much. So the next question is, how do we determine which policies, laws, etc. to target, and how can we be most impactful? if Terrence wants to comment on that.
Sorry, say it again. Like I was sorry.
How can we determine which policies, laws, etc. to target, and how can we be most impactful?
I think start with like I go back to the 13th Amendment, because like when you watch the thing on Netflix, they talk about how it was kind of it was slavery was ended, but it was kind of a way to still have slavery, like in a sense, like, and that and because after the law was made, like you say, like there was a lot of Black or African Americans being being arrested and used to repair from the war, like in mass. So I think you start there, because I mean, obviously that's one of the reasons that slavery ended, and I mean, you got to start from the beginning, from all that. Like, and what was the other part? I'm sorry.
That was good. Yeah, thank you.
Right.
Gracie, do you have anything to comment on that?
Yeah, I would say look at bills that are specifically targeted towards maybe catching behaviors or towards punishing behaviors extremely harshly. So I know in Tennessee, we just enacted a bill this year about no cell phones. And in theory, you're looking at it and you're like, oh, this bill is so we don't talk on our cell phones. But then you see cops on their cell phones, you see other people on their cell phones, and you got to think, when did this bill come into the state house? And it was right after all those police brutality videos with cell phone cameras started coming out. So it's to look at things with this objective, almost cynical eye and say, okay, as a white person, this bill only means I can't talk on my phone. But then you got to flip it and say, how could this bill affect somebody else negatively? Or you look at it and you say, okay, this bill says, maybe the no knock warrants. If somebody breaks into my house and I'm passing, it might be a situation where they see me and I raise up and they don't do anything. But if my brother were to do that, they would just see this big black male raise up. So it's looking at those kind of things and flipping yourself and saying, how would this look for a Black person?
Yeah, awesome. Excellent point, Gracie. Thank you. Now we would like to take a few minutes and allow people to talk live. If you would like to do so, comment in the chat box and we will call on you to do so. But before we do that, Karlyssa, would you like to share anything about the last question?
What was the last question? Sorry.
You're good. How do we determine which policies and laws to target, and how can we be most impactful?
So I think we have to elect leaders who believe that Black Lives Matter. Because if they're saying those things, if they're saying it out loud, then chances are they believe it. I mean, I hope so. I mean, I know politicians are crooked and stuff, but anyway, because if they're not saying that, then they don't think that Black Lives Matter. So if you're voting for people who are saying things like all lives matter, or they, let's be colorblind, if you're voting for those people, then chances are you are not being a solution. You are being part of the problem. And I follow people on Instagram and on Facebook, activists, Black activists. One is Sean King. He always has a project going on. He always has ways for you to help, people to call. And so that's what I do. I follow people, Black activists, D-Ray Mckesson. I'm sure there's like a list somewhere of activists you could follow. And they make being an ally easy, because they tell you the things to do. They tell you who to call. And I'm sure that there are ways that you can make it more local, and it's not so that way it's not on such a national scale and you feel like you're doing more. But yeah, so my first bit would be to vote for people who align themselves with movements that that celebrate humans, that try to see everyone as people and not as, a number or anything else. So yeah, that's all I got.
Awesome, thank you. Joe Pinza, would you like to share?
Yeah, hi. I'm the city archivist at the public library, and I started the city archive in 2012. And a big part of the postmodern view of archives is that we construct history, and who we allow in the archives and what voices we document in the archives really puts a bracket around how we continue to view our history. And adding the voices of African Americans, Blacks, minorities, women, authors, artists, all of the people that don't necessarily work their way into the municipal record through city council meeting minutes, through church records. We have to construct those archives. They're not going to come in. So I often want to solicit oral histories within the Black community in Elizabethton. But one of the barriers I'm facing is that some people in our community feel as though we've reached a point in history where things are better. And that by sharing stories about their experiences with racism and oppression, they're kind of rabble-rousing or digging up dirt or causing trouble. And they don't want that to be visited on them and their grandchildren in a time when they feel like they've achieved some level of success with race relations in a community where they're less than 0.5%. The problem is I have an abundance of documents, photographs that show in stark contrast the racism and oppression that was existing in Carter County and the Mountain South throughout the 20th century. So you have these documents, but you don't have a community that's really wanting to share that story for fear of retribution. And I don't want that for them. I want to create a space where we can house those records in a way that educates our community. So how can I bridge that gap? How can I make a pitch that makes people feel safe, but also will help us document an important part of our history?
I think the person you talk to is Pearl Smith. You go straight to her. She'll tell you all of it. If you don't know her, then I'm sure she knows you. Trust me. But I appreciate that means one, just a lot to me, because you don't see it in a lot of history books and things like that of Black culture. Yeah, they give you like a chapter or a few pages, but it's predominantly white. I think how you cross the bridge is one, just get people from the Black community to kind of speak, not really speak for you but just kind of on your behalf to bring that side, because if I wanted white culture or whatever, it's I would come to you to help me speak to the white community, and I think you're right, it's so why do we learn history if people just want to hide it, you learn history is so you don't repeat it, You know, it's like, so, I mean, it's good to have those things. So, you know, it's like, you know, my great grandfather might have, you know, been in the paper for being a racist or something. It's like, but you know what? It's like, I'm gonna change it. It's like, and I'm, you know, and I'm gonna put our family in the paper for something, you know, more positive and more, you know, and more for the people. So, you know, I think it gives, you know, young people, you know, a way to, you know, either, you know, live up to a higher standard, you know. And I think that, you know, that's a good point. Is like, I really like that question. I think, you know, I'll let, you know, Courtney or Grace, or Carlos is gone right now, is like, but Courtney or Grace, take it from there.
Hey, well, I commend you for that effort. I think that's amazing that you have gathered those things. And to some of your point, I think people will be hesitant because it's painful, especially to people who are there in the throes of it and having those literal experiences during those time frames. So I don't know how to help you gain better understanding, or to have people come in and be willing to share those stories. If you could somehow get to them through their grandchildren or through their children, or if they would share those stories with those younger generations in their families that could then come back and relay those things. I don't think there would be any fear of like recommendation for those people who literally had those experiences. But if they would be willing to share those experiences with a trusted family member that could then relay those experiences to you, then maybe that would be a starting point for you. And then on the flip side of that coin, I feel like there's probably people who are absolutely willing to share and to volunteer that information. We just have to find them. And how we find them, I don't know, but we've got to find them, because I know they're there. I know they're here. I know they're willing to give and to share and to allow people to have truths of that time. Because, you know, without knowledge, we perish. For lack of knowledge, we perish. And maybe that's a reason we have continued to have a perishing environment in America when it comes to race relations and to Black people, because we do not know our history. We don't know it. We're not taught it. Teachers aren't taught it. So how can they teach it to their students when they don't know it themselves? And the fact that we have to go then seek out our own information and teach ourselves, which for most of us, maybe we have our awakening in college, maybe it comes before that, maybe it comes years and years after that. But we're not knowledgeable because we haven't been taught those things. So having people like you who are willing to categorize and to help us be able to gain knowledge on our own history is absolutely commendable.
Thank you. Miss Melanie Sellers, do you have anything to share?
You're muted.
I didn't warn myself not to do that.
Do the best of us.
Public defender in Carter and Johnson counties, sometimes going over into Johnson City. And I just wanted to ask if there's anything anyone wanted to share about our criminal justice system locally. Maybe it's your own experiences, maybe it's someone you know, even just reputation. More to help me have perspective here locally about our criminal justice system.
So I'll share two big things for me. The first time I got pulled over, I was so scared that he was going to see my skin color rather than the fact that I was speeding, which I shouldn't have been speeding, but you know, sometimes you don't look down and you're like, so I was so scared that by the time he could make it from his police cruiser to the car, I was sobbing on the phone with my best friend. And I was like, I just need you on the phone because I know that if I get shot, you're going to hear it. And that rings true all the time. Another thing is one of my brother's really good friends, her mom is a DA in the area, and she's Black, and all the time she gets things said about her, about how she can't be that smart or how she talks white. So I think it's both on the outside of the system and within the system, because I know she gets a lot of, for lack of better terms, racist crap from her peers and people around her. So maybe just fixing the way we speak and talk, or if we see somebody like a coworker saying something extremely unintelligent or saying something extremely hurtful, being proactive to be like, hey, that's not cool. Or if we see somebody who's Black being pulled over, just pulling either in front of their car or behind the police cruiser. I recommend in front of their car, because they're less likely to act in police brutality if they see a white person near them that could say something to them or call them out.
Okay, so this is Jillian. I'm hopping in on this question real quick. So this is something that's really near to my heart in Carter County, because we work really hard with juvenile court, particularly to try and make them see people's lives through a trauma-informed lens. And so if we could train all of our police officers, all of our court system staff on adverse childhood experiences, and really the way that what we experience as a child and trauma that we've been through affects us later. Most of the time, the kids that walk in juvenile court are not bad kids, as we like to call them. They are kids who have been through things that we can't even imagine. And so often we just push them aside because they're doing bad things, and we say they're making bad choices, or they need to get their act together, those kinds of things, and they literally cannot, because they've experienced so much trauma in their lives that their brains have been shaped in a way that they can't develop appropriately, and they can't respond to things appropriately. And I just want to throw that out there, because they actually have added racism to the adverse childhood experiences kind of test as something that, that's another ACE for people. And so we, for a long time, I think, thought of sort of abuse and neglect and those kinds of things as trauma, but this is another one. And so if we already have some kiddos that are kind of up there on the ACEs score, and then we're throwing racism in on top of that, it's just something that for me, when I first heard about this or learned about this, it was like, changed everything that I ever believed about anything. Because when you realize I need to be asking people what happened to you instead of what in the world is wrong with you, it totally shifts your perspective on everything. And I've got a lot of folks in my community that are very resistant, like they've always done things this certain way, and there are bad kids and there are bad people, and very resistant to sort of change that frame of mind to something that's more trauma informed. And so for me, that would be a game changer for our sort of judicial system as a whole, just to get our people trained in ACEs and what that means. I can't say enough about Carter County's juvenile court, because they are my buddies and they are willing to really look at these things and try to make things a little bit more trauma informed. But we have a really, really long way to go. And I can only speak for Carter County. And I will also kind of shout out to Jason Shaw, because he is fantastic at training his officers to look for adverse childhood experiences. But it's not even that simple. I think that's our first step, but we have to change these belief systems that people are bad, or kids are bad, or kids are just doing stupid things, when really, I mean, it's not that simple. It's a trauma thing and a brain thing and all of those. So just throwing that out there.
I think there needs to be some sort of marrying within the criminal justice system to what you're saying, Jillian, of mental health care and policing, or whatever terminology is correct within the justice system. There has to be a different thought process other than staying inside of that tiny little box that we want to put criminals inside of, and not to use that as an excuse for their behavior, but there has to be some other level of thought process in why did they participate in that behavior, what background things caused them to want to do or participate in those various illegal activities. I just think there needs to be some sort of marrying between the justice system and healthcare, specifically mental health and social work. If those three beings could come together and work properly with each other, I believe there would be better outcomes for the criminal justice system in general and for those who are a part of it for whatever reason.
And Melanie, if you want the DA's office to have ACEs training, I'll send my mom. My mom is the certified ACEs trainer for the Elizabethton, Carter County, and Johnson County school system. So if you want to let Jillian know, I'll make my mom come and give everybody ACEs.
I'm with the public defender's office. The DA's office doesn't typically do what I tell them, so I don't know. Sometimes, but
public defender's office.
Yeah, and I'm a trainer too, so we can do trauma-informed care, we can do ACEs, any of those things. And I say that to everybody on this call because the more we can sort of shift perspectives to be trauma-informed, the greater change we're able to make. Anybody else have thoughts on that? I stole Kenna's job, but. Okay.
just to follow up, I would, I worry that people are afraid to complain, or, I wonder if clients have been afraid to tell me, hey, I feel like I was pulled over for this, or, hey, I think there's more to this. And so, I worry that I'm not seeing things, not because I don't want to see them, but I just don't know to see them. And so I'm, the last few weeks particularly, I've really been thinking about that, about how do I back up and make sure I'm asking the right questions? How do I make sure that I'm doing enough and even know where to look? And so, if people aren't comfortable talking about it or feel like they're not gonna be heard, that I won't know. And so I worry about that, I guess.
Well, yeah, the biggest thing you said is like, being heard. Like, anybody that's in a situation like that, whether, this is, I guess a totally different situation, but, if I had a daughter that's like, and somebody, happened to, touch her or something like that, I would want her to come out and say something. Like, I wouldn't want her to be afraid, to come out and defend herself, because I would believe her. Is like, because and that's the thing, like, like most people, most people will just brush it off because they don't think that you'll believe them. It's like, and some people will cry wolf, like, and but the thing is, I guess you have to be a judgment of character, and of course you can't believe everybody. Is like, but it doesn't hurt to look into, like, because I mean, if it's not true, then I mean it'll just they just lied on their, just made it worse for themselves, like, and I mean, if it's if it is true, then I mean you've taken somebody, the officer or whatever, I was like, you open, his, the eyes of whoever his boss is to them, so they can keep an eye on that, like, and or take action, if, I guess depending on the situation and how they deal with situations, but I mean, I don't know what questions you ask or whatever. It's like, but I mean, it's really just, I guess, asking how the situation came about, like, what was said, and, things like that.
I think it has a lot to do with just trust and accountability. We have to be able to trust that our justice system is going to work properly on our behalf. And then we also have to know that potentially if there was any sort of grievance on behalf of whoever, that they're going to be held accountable. So when there's like a lack of trust and a definite lack of accountability, then you're going to have people who are less likely to speak up about their grievances because they don't trust that they're going to be taken care of, and they know that those persons who have wronged them are probably not going to be held accountable. So until we can trust in a system that is supposed to work for all of us and have those people who are working against us be held accountable, it's not going to benefit your client, or not going to benefit those people around them who may need those benefits.
Yeah, thank you. All of you guys, your words have been so inspirational. Thank you so much. I think we've all really learned a lot today. We are running a little bit over time. There will be a recording available. If you do have to pop off, we are going to continue a little bit further, answering a couple more questions, so you can feel free to stick around for that, or if you have to go, feel free to. So we have another question for Terrence. It says, what can coaches do, or could your coach do, to have done differently to help you have greater success, academically or athletically?
I guess, you know, for that matter, I think, you know, the Elizabeth system, they done pretty well with that. Like, obviously I can only speak on, you know, Elizabeth because that's where I went. Yeah, I guess, I mean, because, you know, coach, you know, my coach was Sean Lynn, and he harped on, you know, grades and, you know, making the right grades and things like that. I guess, for me, yeah, I would say, it's, you know, achieve, you know, just to achieve more, like, you know, because, you know, I was fine with just making, like, you know, a couple of A's, you know, B's, and, you know, a few C's here and there, like, you know, and, you know, I would, sometimes I wish, you know, my coaches would have pushed me, you know, to make, you know, straight A's, is that because I could have been that way, but, you know, I obviously, you know, didn't care that much to push myself that way, like, and, you know, I think that that comes with, I guess, you know, when you're a coach, you know, which kids you can push, you know, which kids you have to lay back on, and give more love to, like, and that doesn't mean you love, you know, one more than the other. It just means that, you know, some people need, you know, more attention than the other. Just like, you know, if you have more kids, if you have, you know, more than one kid, or, you know, you have two or three, is like, you know that, you know, this kid, you know, needs more attention than the other, like, and then that's what it's about, like, and I think, you know, in the end, you know, you just want, you know, I fit my personal opinion, your goal as a coach is to make that, you know, that young man or, you know, young woman into an adult, like, you know, into a, you know, into a strong, you know, lead them on their way to their path to where, you know, because sometimes you're that father figure, you know, in their life, or mother figure in their life, and you have a responsibility more than just, you know, more than just teaching them the game of, you know, whatever sport you coach, to, you know, to teach them these things in life that they're not getting taught. And I think, you know, more coaches, you know, need to come together and, you know, and do that.
And Terrence, you care if I piggyback a little bit on that question? Gracie, I think you mentioned that you grew up in the Carter County school system, and I'm a coach and a teacher here, and what I'd like to know is what are some of the things that that teachers or coaches, particularly in a rural area, might not have known that could have helped you, or some of the things that may have even caused you problems or made problems worse. What are some things that we could do better?
Yeah, so I actually grew up in the Washington County school system, but I was real close and I had really good friends that were Black and went to Carter County. So what I would say is in sports, I guess that's where I'll go first with it. With sports, I would really look at how your teammates are saying things about other people. I've heard a lot of times from one specific school around here, they consistently make fun of Science Hill, and they're like, Science Hill only wins because they have all those Black boys. And so it's like when you hear things like that as a coach, just calling it out and being like, no, they win because they consistently practice, or they win because they practice this way, or, you know, just making it not a thing where it's like they win because they're Black. And I hear that a lot with ETSU too. People are like, oh, they only win because they've got those big Black boys on full scholarships. For school, I would say specifically just being very proactive about looking into the materials that you're teaching and looking at maybe the view that you're portraying of history, and pulling out the whitewashed pieces and saying this is what happened. And it's not to say all history is whitewashed, it's just giving a very clear field view, which I know is kind of hard to Tennessee with their curriculum.
So I wanted to just share one thing with you. Something that we've really been working on, I'll like tie it back to ACEs again, but really teaching coaches what ACEs and trauma look like in kids. And so we actually have some curriculum that I'm happy to share with you. It's a Coaching Boys into Men curriculum, and basically you take 15 minutes at the end of every practice and just have real talk with your boys. And so I'd love to share that with you. We have it printed. I'll bring it to you at school or whatever. And then we also have Athletes as Leaders, which is the kind of the girls version of Coaching Boys into Men. And so it really touches on everything from drugs to trauma to racism to domestic violence prevention, all kinds of things. But it's just that in committing 15 minutes a night of your practice, you can really, there's some great evidence that it really can be a game changer for some boys just by having that consistent 15-minute talk about these hard things that most of the time nobody's really talking to them about. So I'm happy to share that. If you want to throw your email in the chat box or send it to me or whatever, I'll get you some stuff. And anybody else too.
So another question is, what can we do to draw more young Black people into teaching?
So I'll say something about this because I am Black and an education major. So I don't personally, there's no other Black people. I've only been in 2 education classes because I'm a sophomore this year. So I've only had 2, and there's been no other Black people in those classes. And the schools that we observed and the schools that the teachers that came to us to speak in our classes, they were all white. And I was like, well, this is kind of weird. But then there was one school that I went to, and all the teachers, I was walking down the hallway to find my classroom to observe. All the teachers were white standing outside the hallway. You know, they were all super nice, friendly, whatever. But then I get to the end of the hall, and the teacher that I'm observing was Black. So I was like, okay, so am I observing her because I'm Black and she's Black? Or is this just how this happened? Or what's going on? So I don't think there's anything really that you can do to attract people to like education. I just think it has to be in their heart, because this is always what I've wanted to do. So yeah, I don't really think there's anything that you can do with that. I don't know if Courtney could speak more on that, because I feel like it's kind of the same situation with like nursing and.
Sure. I think representation is
Yeah.
representation. If we don't see people who look like us in those positions, then why would we think that we could achieve those positions? I think there are things that can be done, and the number one thing that can be done is representation. Hire in the people who are Black, that are absolutely willing, who are exceptionally educated to be educators. My mother was an educator in Hamlin County for 37 years. I grew up in a household where my parents had the blessing of being educated individuals and instilled that into their children. But I'm an exception in some respects to a rule. And when people don't see that they can become those things, and then when they don't see other people who look like them becoming those things, then they're not going to believe that they can do those things. So it's, in my personal opinion, the number one thing is just representation.
Yeah, well, I'll speak from, I guess, a coach's standpoint, like, on this, is like, because you kind of have the same thing, like, there's a lot of young Black people that could be coaches, like, and they scare away from that, because my dream eventually is to become a head coach somewhere. Like, is it going to be in this area? It's like, I don't know. It's like, but we've seen not too long ago that I'm pretty sure, I'm almost positive that he was our first Black coach in this area, as like, Gerald Sensible at David Crockett, like, as like, and people might not say this, but I felt like he was set up for failure. Like people were thinking the worst already, like, and I mean, like, of course he tried to fight through it, but it's just like, like me, when I saw him take that position, that's just like you're saying, like, representation, that that gave me a outlook of, like, man, we could really do this. Like, I could really be a head coach somewhere. I could really be in this area. I don't have to go to Knoxville or or Nashville or other side. Like, it's like, I could be a head coach somewhere right here. And then when that whole situation went down, it kind of it's like we took 2 steps forward and 20 steps back. Is that because I looked at it like, man, like, if I people are going to be, if I apply for a head coaching job someday, then people are going to be looking at that situation as like, and they're going to be they're going to go back at that, and they're going to judge me off of what happened with him. As like, and I'm gonna be set up for failure too. It's like, which, I mean, it's like, I'm willing to fight for that. It's like, and I'm willing to to keep going for my dream. It's like, because I'm not just gonna let the statistic drag me down. It's like, but it's the fact that, like you said, representation. Like, it's like, if he was still in that position, then I wouldn't feel I guess as bad or as down on going for what I want to be.
Last call for questions.
Thank you, everyone, so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Feel free to add more questions in the chat box. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you all. It's been a wonderful time.
We can go now, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Oh, how do I exit? Let's do this one.